He didn't lose control of his family overnight. He slowly poisoned it with control issues, disguised as faith. Something shifted in Kody Brown around 2016, subtly at first, then unmistakably. The man who once strutted through family gatherings with manic enthusiasm began to curdle into someone meaner, angrier, and strangely self-obsessed. The timeline is hard to ignore. Maddie's wedding marked the turning point. By the time McKelty's rolled around, the sparkle was gone. The grin looked forced, the eyes harder. Even his hair, once the bouncy symbol of his chaotic charisma, turned wiry and gray, as if mirroring the decay of whatever charm he once possessed. Between Maddie's wedding and the birth of Axel, the shift became glaring. Kody's interviews took on an edge of bitterness. His face, perpetually tight with irritation, seemed to belong to someone permanently aggrieved. The question is, what happened? The easy answer is time. The more interesting one is testosterone. Around this period, Kody began displaying the textbook markers of midlife hormonal overcorrection: acne along the neck, the puffed midsection, the unpredictable temper, and the sudden, performative obsession with fitness and masculinity. For a man in his late 50s, this isn't a natural second wind. It's a biochemical one. Given Kody's background in wrestling, a culture historically marinated in steroid chatter, the theory isn't exactly far-fetched. But if this was a reinvention, it backfired spectacularly. The therapy didn't make him better. It made him unbearable. Control has always been Kody's favorite drug, and by McKelty's wedding, he was running out of supply. Maddie's husband, Caleb, came pre-approved, familiar, predictable, and ultimately manageable. The same applied to Mitch. But Tony Padron? A wild card. Kody didn't choose him, didn't shape him, didn't get to play the benevolent gatekeeper. And in Kody's world, that's unforgivable. The less control he had over his adult children's choices, the more belligerent he became toward the ones who slipped through his grip. By the late Vegas years, Kody's worldview had shifted from polygamist peacemaker to patriarchal philosopher. His talk of obedience, respect, and leadership grew louder, echoing the rise of far-right rhetoric flooding the internet at the time. The infamous One House presentation, dramatically titled, "Where we go one, we go all," wasn't just an architectural fantasy, it was a manifesto. A QAnon slogan masquerading as family unity. 2016, the year of Trump's election, seemed to split Kody's psyche as cleanly as it did the country. While the family basked in their perfectly functioning Las Vegas setup, neighbors, stability, a sense of home, Kody was already imagining his exodus, muttering about divine callings and fresh starts. Robin, ever the co-author of his delusions, reportedly nudged the paranoia along. The show's longevity, the cost of weddings, the fairness of future expenses, everything became ammunition in their shared echo chamber. What began as spiritual leadership turned into economic self-preservation wrapped in religious rhetoric. The move from Vegas wasn't a calling, it was a convenient escape route, from responsibilities, from equality, and from the facade of shared decision-making he'd long abandoned. Some men age into wisdom. Kody Brown aged into conspiracy. He called it a joke, but Peyton Brown's comment about Dayton might have exposed something the family's desperate to hide. Peyton Brown's latest detour into the world of reckless commentary is a perfect example of what happens when someone inherits their father's talent for theatricality, but none of his foresight. During a TikTok live, Peyton casually suggested that his half-brother Dayton was absent from Sister Wives because he'd done something really bad. Predictably, the internet lit up like a Christmas tree. Then, in classic Brown family fashion, he backpedaled days later, insisting he didn't mean to start a rumor and didn't actually know why Dayton wasn't on the show. In other words, just kidding. This is not new territory for Peyton. His self-proclaimed sense of humor tends to rely on dramatic exaggerations, often blurring the line between entertainment and irresponsibility. His follow-up explanation, more of an embarrassed shrug than a retraction, suggests that the original comment was less a revelation and more an ill-conceived attempt at being funny. Unfortunately, in a family where even casual remarks can spark a media storm, such jokes rarely land without collateral damage. Dayton, meanwhile, has remained notably private. His absence from the show has long seemed less scandalous and more self-protective. As someone on the autism spectrum, Dayton's straightforward communication style doesn't lend itself well to the scripted half-truths of reality television. If Kody and Robin prefer to control the narrative, keeping Dayton off camera may be less about secrecy and more about avoiding unscripted honesty. A dangerous thing in a household so devoted to image management. Peyton, however, seems to have inherited the worst of both parents' instincts, Kody's flair for chaos and Christine's love of performance. His sister Mykelti shares a similar outgoing streak, but at least she's learned how to manage it without lighting the family's reputation on fire. The older brothers, Logan and Hunter, serve as a study in contrast, models of restraint who seem to have figured out that the best way to survive the Brown legacy is to stay off social media altogether. In the end, Peyton's walkback wasn't just damage control. It was an admission that his need for attention occasionally outruns his common sense. Whether he let slip something that Kody and Robin would rather keep hidden or simply made an ill-timed joke, the result is the same. Another Brown family PR cleanup, another rumor squashed, and another reminder that the most dramatic part of Sister Wives often happens after the cameras stop rolling. They said Mary ruined Christmas, but what if it was actually Kody all along? It's almost impressive that in the sprawling history of Kody Brown's parental mediocrity, there exists one moment, just one, where his words brushed against something resembling wisdom. During the Las Vegas era, when Mary's delay in submitting paperwork meant her family didn't move into their house in time for Christmas, Leon threw a fit. For once, Kody played the level-headed parent, reminding Leon to be grateful for basic comforts like food, shelter, and clothing. It was a fleeting instance of sanity before the usual circus resumed. Yet, even that rare parenting success is tangled in the usual Brown family dysfunction. The narrative has long painted Mary as the culprit behind the delayed paperwork, an odd accusation for a woman known for her obsessive organization and drive. Kody, on the other hand, has the paperwork habits of a man who thinks signing a document is beneath his divine masculinity. He was on the deed and mortgage, which means the delay was as much his responsibility, if not more. But, true to form, Kody likely let Mary take the blame because it made for better optics. It fits the established pattern, Mary covering for Kody's incompetence, hoping a little martyrdom might win her back a shred of affection. Instead, she took the fall while he sauntered off into yet another self-made storyline of male victimhood, eventually repaying her loyalty with divorce papers. Everything about the situation reeks of Kody's slow sabotage. Whether the delay was caused by his negligence or a deliberate effort to frustrate Mary and elevate Robin's standing, the outcome was the same. Mary humiliated, Kody absolved. After all, what better way to prove patriarchal dominance than to let your wife burn for your own mistake? And then there's Leon, long accused of being spoiled and ungrateful, a label born from circumstances beyond their control. Kody's absence left Mary desperate for emotional support, and with no partner to lean on, she placed that burden squarely on her only child. Leon became both confidant and surrogate spouse, a dynamic that blurred parental lines and fueled resentment from others. Yes, Leon was indulged, but that indulgence was the byproduct of Mary's loneliness, not Leon's entitlement. She overcompensated, giving her child everything she could, while Kody gave nothing but lectures from the driver's seat of a convertible. Leon's so-called spoiled behavior wasn't rebellion. It was survival in a home where emotional labor was constantly misplaced. So when Kody sermonized about gratitude, he wasn't wrong, but he was hardly the hero of that scene. His parenting was, as always, performative, a speech for the cameras, not a principle he lived by. The only consistency in Kody's story is his talent for deflecting blame, rewriting history, and letting the women clean up the mess, both literal and metaphorical. In the end, the paperwork delay wasn't about a missed Christmas deadline. It was a snapshot of the Brown family's entire dysfunction. A mother desperate to please, a father allergic to accountability, and a child caught in the emotional crossfire, expected to be grateful for crumbs while the adults waged their quiet wars of ego. She didn't lose a sister wife, she manufactured a villain. Robin Brown has perfected a rare art form, turning self-inflicted chaos into public martyrdom. When Christine announced she was leaving, Robin didn't just accept it like an adult, she sprinted home to tell her daughters that Christine no longer wanted a relationship with them. The emotional fallout was immediate. Her girls' wounded expressions during the goodbye scene weren't confusion. They were the result of their mother's carefully crafted manipulation. Robin, it seems, never misses an opportunity to cast herself and her children as the eternal victims of someone else's perfectly reasonable boundaries. The exchange itself was simple. Robin asked Christine whether she wanted to mend things or needed space. Christine, calm and clear, said she needed space. But inside Robin's head, space became a sweeping rejection of her children, her house full of Hobby Lobby wall art, and her endless collection of tragic blouses. Rather than hearing a woman drawing a boundary, Robin heard the soundtrack of her own self-pity. And because martyrdom photographs better than accountability, she chose to act devastated. Of course, the tragedy worked in her favor. By dramatizing Christine's exit, Robin made sure Kody stayed emotionally tethered to her, his last loyal wife, bravely suffering through everyone else's betrayal. It's a performance so convincing she might actually believe it herself. Meanwhile, Mary, never one to miss an opportunity to look sanctimonious, took this as her cue to perform her own bitterness. Watching her tell Christine, "Congratulations, you're leaving the family," was like watching someone stab with a smile. Mary, after all, would have left years ago if her online soulmate hadn't turned out to be a catfish. Her nastiness in that scene wasn't loyalty, it was humiliation. Christine's departure reminded her that she'd clung to Kody's indifference for decades, waiting for scraps of attention she'd never get. Her "I started this family" refrain has become both a defense and a delusion. She genuinely seemed to believe Christine should have sought her approval before leaving, as if Mary's opinions still mattered in a family that has long since emotionally divorced her. When Kody threw his "knife in the kidneys" tantrum, Mary's slight smile at his attention said everything. Being noticed, even in his rage, was better than being invisible. And yet, when it was all over, who did she turn to for a sympathetic ear? Robin, the high priestess of selective empathy. The same Robin who never allowed Christine or Mary any real bond with her children, now demanded that Christine maintain one. It's a ludicrous expectation considering Robin had spent years keeping her kids sequestered from the rest of the family. Christine was never permitted to babysit them, and her own children were rarely welcomed in Robin's home. So when Robin cried that Christine was abandoning her children, the only honest response was, what relationship was there to abandon? The answer, of course, lies in Robin's finances and optics. Family unity looks great on camera and, more importantly, supports the income stream. When Kody lamented that no one wanted to help pay for the tender-aged kids' college, it wasn't lost on anyone that Robin's pleas for connection often come with a price tag. But the most grotesque part of Robin's narrative isn't her selfishness. It's her cruelty disguised as maternal concern. No decent mother would invent such a lie for her children, especially one that paints another woman as heartless. Telling your daughters that their sister mother doesn't love them isn't protection, it's psychological harm. It isolates them from a family that might have been a source of genuine affection and stability. Robin has damaged everyone in this tangled family tree, but no one more than her own kids. By feeding them these stories, she's robbed them of the chance to maintain loving relationships and replaced those bonds with bitterness and confusion. Her cruelty peaked in moments like the forgotten holiday scene, where one of her older girls asked why the others weren't coming. Robin's response, gleefully noting that "they don't like you" wasn't maternal honesty. It was vindictive satisfaction. For Saul and Ari, the youngest of the brood, it's a tragedy. They adored Truly and the rest of their extended family. They could have had joyful, lasting connections if not for their mother's obsession with control and victimhood. Robin Brown's story is not one of misunderstanding or miscommunication. It's the story of a woman who weaponizes emotion, rewrites history, and calls it love. And while she may have fooled Kody, the audience can see the truth clearly. She didn't lose a sister wife. She engineered the loss. Because the role of abandoned victim suits her far better than that of equal partner. She moved her entire life to be close to her kids, and now they're all leaving her behind. Christine Brown's heartbreak isn't drama, it's karma. Christine Brown's recent display of frustration over her children and grandchildren scattering across the map wasn't some dramatic outburst. It was a thoroughly human one. She moved to Utah largely to be near her family, only to watch them begin migrating away again. Beneath the teary confessionals and misplaced irritation was a simple truth. She feels left behind. For someone whose identity has long revolved around motherhood, the sudden quiet of distance can be unbearable. Her children have dispersed, Peyton in North Carolina, Gwendolyn in Arizona, and now the grandchildren are following suit. The woman who once juggled 6 children in a single household now faces the reality that her family's most tender milestones will unfold through phone screens and airport visits. Her disappointment wasn't petty. It was maternal grief in real time. Of course, Christine's emotional reaction wasn't helped by the McKelty and Tony factor. Their move, driven by Tony's pursuit of a chess career, struck Christine as impractical and even self-indulgent. In her view, it's the kind of move one supports politely but quietly questions. After all, Christine uprooted her entire life to be close to this daughter. And now, in a twist worthy of family irony, McKelty is the one creating the distance. Still, the tension between Christine and Tony has always been a spectator sport. Tony famously showed no hesitation discussing Christine's private life on national television, and their dynamic has since evolved into a mutual volley of sarcastic jabs. Their banter isn't venom. It's the uneasy truce of two people who have learned to tolerate each other through humor. Yet McKelty's defensiveness during Christine's emotional moment hinted at something deeper: guilt. After all, McKelty was one of the loudest voices urging her mother to move to Utah. Now, just as Christine settles into her supposed forever home, her daughter is the one packing boxes. The déjà vu is almost poetic, eerily reminiscent of Kody once pleading with Maddie and Caleb to return to Vegas, only to relocate the entire family months later. In the end, Christine's outburst wasn't about disapproval. It was about loss. She loves her family deeply, perhaps too deeply for her own peace of mind. And the realization that she can't be everywhere at once is cutting her down to size. For all the cameras, confessions, and headlines, this was one of her most authentic moments yet. A grandmother mourning the slow, inevitable unraveling of the togetherness she worked her whole life to build. Robin Brown didn't suddenly get independent. She just ran out of competition. For years, Robin Brown built her identity around a single, unwavering truth: she could not function without Kody Brown. The woman could barely make a grocery run without his emotional support, or perhaps his surveillance. Yet somehow when Special Forces came calling, she managed to survive an entire week without her self-proclaimed soulmate. How touching. Of course, the simplest explanation is also the least romantic. The Browns are broke. Once the family's financial lifeline was cut off, no longer able to siphon from the collective pot, necessity suddenly became the mother of independence. Robin, the same woman who once melted into tears at the thought of sharing her husband, has miraculously evolved into a self-sufficient household manager when there's a paycheck involved. Funny how that works. The Special Forces shoot hardly required a 6-month deployment. It was a brief stint, barely a week and a half, hardly long enough for anyone to grow nostalgic. But Robin's newfound tolerance for Kody's absence feels less like personal growth and more like situational convenience. With no sister wives left to threaten her throne, she can finally relax. No rivals, no insecurity. Just Robin, her children, and the empire she methodically dismantled from within. Let's not pretend she ever needed Kody's presence for practical purposes. Between nannies and older, parentified children, her home functioned just fine. What she needed was control. Over Kody, over the narrative, over the illusion of a family united under her spiritual stewardship. Once the original wives were gone, her power was secure. Suddenly, she didn't require his constant companionship. She required his obedience and income. And Kody, ever the opportunist, likely jumped at the chance to reclaim some television relevance. Whether his special forces stint was about proving his manhood or just another desperate bid for screen time, one thing is certain: Robin let him go because she had nothing left to lose. So yes, Robin managed just fine without Kody. Because this time, his absence didn't risk her status. It paid for it. He thought she'd laugh, blush, and stay loyal. Instead, Janelle told him exactly where to go. There wasn't just one final straw for Janelle Brown. It was more of a bale dumped on her back, year after year, until she finally stood up, shook off the dust, and said the quiet part out loud. Enough. But if there were ever a moment that crystallized the end, it came during that infamous lunch in Season 17, Episode 13, around the 8-minute mark. Her eyes, suddenly a piercing blue inferno, said what her calm voice wouldn't. She was done being handled, managed, and gaslit by the self-appointed patriarch of dysfunction. That was the loyalty lunch Kody, ever the narcissist in denial, leaned forward with his salesman smile and said, "You and I get that if you're loyal to me." What followed was less a conversation and more an implosion decades in the making. Janelle's rage, usually buried beneath years of politeness and pragmatism, boiled over. When she snapped back with an unfiltered "F you," it wasn't rebellion, it was emancipation. Kody's reaction, predictably, was the emotional equivalent of a playground tantrum. He resorted to that sing-song mock child tone, his signature move when faced with a woman who's no longer buying his act. Watching him perform that fingers in the ears I'm not listening routine while Janelle tried to speak was less husbandly communication and more toddler meltdown. That same lunch also showcased another of Kody's manipulative party tricks. He leaned in and mused that they'd been acting like they weren't a married couple, then casually wondered if he might kiss her. An obvious test to see if he still had the power to make her giggle and stay. It was classic Kody. Throw a crumb of affection and wait for gratitude, all while reserving the actual feast for Robin. Janelle didn't take the bait. Her silence was louder than any rejection. But that lunch wasn't born in a vacuum. It was the culmination of years of slow betrayal. The COVID years merely stripped away the veneer. When Kody used the pandemic as an excuse to park himself permanently at Robin's house, his priorities became impossible to deny. His so-called rules were less about safety and more about control, and about ensuring that only one household benefited from his presence. Then came the treatment of Janelle's boys. He berated, excluded, and humiliated them for daring to question him, all while insisting he was simply enforcing order. The same man who couldn't bother to attend Isabel's surgery now expected loyalty from the children he had effectively abandoned. Janelle watched him use her son's independence as a moral failing, and that was when the scales fell from her eyes. Yet, for all her strength, Janelle's awakening wasn't instant. She still spent her birthday with him after he ignored Savannah on Christmas. Even after his blatant neglect, she lingered. Habit, hope, and history are hard to quit. But every small slight was another nail in the coffin. Janelle had once convinced herself her marriage was different from Christine's or Mary's. that she had something more functional. Then she lived through the same neglect they had endured for decades and realized the truth. The only constant in Kody's relationships is Kody. In the end, she chose her children, her peace, and her dogs over the delusion. So no, there wasn't one final straw. There was an avalanche of them. And Janelle finally decided she was done being buried. Hit subscribe, not for the drama, but for the truth underneath it.